America's center of power changed, and with it, the dynamics of the political landscape. The consequences will reverberate locally, in Florida, on Capitol Hill, and on the global stage. Voters demanded change on the issues that mattered most: the economy, immigration, and social issues. Now, News 4 Jax goes beyond the headlines with political analysts who provide unique context and perspective. Experts focused on the issues making headlines. This is Politics and Power.
Republicans are pushing to limit H-1B visas. It's framed as protecting American workers. Critics are warning it could cripple research and startups. Welcome to Politics and Power. I'm Bruce Hamilton, and joining me is immigration attorney and founder of the immigration law firm USA for All, Renata Castro. And thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So, Renata, Republican figures, including Vice President J.D. Vance and Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, have intensified calls to curb H-1B visas and to restrict hiring of foreign temporary workers at public universities. Vance frames the effort as an economic safeguard. He says we must ensure our workforce is first in line for good jobs. DeSantis has pursued state-level rules aimed at limiting taxpayer-supported roles for non-citizen temporary workers. Is it, as they say, a safeguard for American workers?
Quite to the contrary, I think that it pushes American workers down the brink of further unemployment. And I'm quite surprised because both DeSantis and Vance were practicing attorneys before venturing into politics. So you would expect at least some working level knowledge of immigration and immigration law. So when we look at what DeSantis has proposed for the Florida public universities, so first of all, about 45% to 50% of revenues that come into Florida universities at this point come from international students. So that is a very big population and quite a big chunk of revenue that benefits the state of Florida. Furthermore, when we look at the overall availability of high top talent to teach at these universities, they're usually concentrated in higher paying markets such as New York, California. Florida has never been known to be a high wage earning state. So for these universities to be able to hire and retain top talent, not below market rates, because that's what DeSantis and Vance suggest that H-1Bs do, which is far from the truth. But it allows the schools to hire top talent at a more competitive rate, and as a result, provide much needed training to the Florida workforce. When we look at Florida and its bid to become the AI venture capital of the United States, we have a major hurdle. Yes, the state of Florida has 0% state income tax, but to counter that, we have a very ill-capacitated workforce. So when companies are looking at setting their locations in Florida, they counterbalance the challenges that it will be, and even the costs, to relocate people from higher education states like Massachusetts, New York, California, to Florida. And even with the zero state income tax, that's not attractive for them. So we have to have a deeper conversation about how these H-1B holding professors, high-level professors, are really contributing to the state of Florida and how they could help shape the Florida economy in 5 to 10 years as a true power force, generating high-paying jobs for everybody in the state and not just a select few.
It's interesting to hear what these legal scholars are saying. They say that there's a structural limit to state action. Immigration policy is federally governed, and state efforts to curtail federally authorized visas face preemption challenges. What are those challenges?
Well, states do not have the ability to interfere with federal policy unless it is an area that is of jurisdiction of the state, and immigration is not one of them. The state has the opportunity to choose as the employer whether or not they extend H-1B sponsorship. That's their right. However, they cannot discriminate based on alienage, and this could be something that's argued in court against the state. In my opinion, this whole presentation by DeSantis is more of theatrics than it is legality, because all he has to do is say to the dean of the university or whomever is the one making the final decisions on sponsorship that the school is just no longer going to extend those sponsorships for those seeking jobs. But we have to beg the question, if there has always been, as DeSantis says, an abundance of qualified, willing, and available individuals to fill those jobs, why haven't they until now? Why have schools in the state of Florida, including grade schools and school boards throughout the state have used the H-1B visa to fill much needed positions because there is a teacher shortage? So when we look at these practical questions, I see legal policy be brought out and shown to the public that mostly doesn't understand immigration law, because it's not the purview of everyday life for Floridians and for Americans in general, but it's a presentation that's more theatrical than legal. And I don't think that this is going to go very far, in my legal opinion.
Yeah, I remember hearing this one interview with a university provost who cautioned that, cutting off these skilled international scholars would jeopardize grant work and partnerships to support thousands of local jobs. Does tech healthcare and academic research depend on international talent? And is there concern that restricting these visa accesses, could it slow projects? Could it raise labor costs? Could it reduce new company formation?
Undoubtedly. I'll give a quick statistic. About 6 months ago, I read an article saying that in the state of Florida, in the mechanical engineering program, bachelor's program, about 87% of students filling those positions or filling those seats were not born in the United States. So imagine that if we were to count on local student capacity to satisfy the demand for mechanical engineers, we would only be looking at a 13% output versus 100% based on the student population that we have now. So the student population is a direct precedent to the output of employees, entrepreneurs, a workforce that's available. I just don't see a world currently where we have a competitive labor market, both in creating and in compensation of employees, that does not have foreign talent in the mix. Not because Americans are incapable. That's not the truth. It's because we have grown as a country to not appreciate stable, conventional jobs as much as the previous generations did. If you have children and you're watching this show, your kids have probably discussed with you being an athlete, being an influencer, being a social media star. And that's more than fine when we look at the realm of possibilities for our kids. But an economy has to be diversified. We need those boring professions, including mine, to make sure that all services are provided. And if our children are not interested in pursuing them, how are we going to satisfy that demand from the market? You talked about healthcare. I have recently seen a CEO in the state of Florida go to a town hall meeting and beg City Hall to help him recruit nurses because there was such shortage. And there's a reason why when immigration laws were codified, there was a favoring of those nurses coming into the United States as long as they spoke English, had a job sponsorship, had a license. So whenever we hear these interviews talking about the invasion of foreign trained employees, the numbers don't support that, and the process doesn't support that. I have seen some of my clients wait as long as a year to even know whether they'll be able to fill a position for their prospective employer. So it really creates a perception that's very different from the truth. And limiting the access to these visas, furthermore, will have a meaningful, real, quantifiable negative impact to our cost of services and even to accessibility of services as we go down the line.
You mentioned perception. There's a lot of misperception. Look, there was a story that was very much in the headlines not all that long ago. You had ICE come in and arrest a number of Hyundai workers who were from South Korea. And these were workers at a battery plant. And people thought, oh, you know, these people are taking away workers from people in the American labor force. But the fact of the matter was that there were people who were qualified to go ahead and set up this battery plant. And that was, you know, brought out very much after the fact, after these people were arrested and deported to South Korea. And now there may be a lawsuit pending. The American public just didn't understand that. The Trump administration admitted that after the fact. There is a lot of misperception out there about what is going on.
I agree. When I see these detentions that are quite violent and they seem to be very so my practice, I'm a practicing immigration attorney, so I'm boots on the ground, and I have a very large client base because sometimes you will have cases that will take as long as 10 years and you're just sitting there and waiting. And having to deal with the panic of these individuals, those who are in the country with status, has been quite challenging. And the United States has lost so much appeal in international markets, both from an investment standpoint, but from a talent standpoint as well, because we have already seen individuals that are well qualified saying, I do not want to be subjected to go into work one day with an authorization, just like happened in the Hyundai plant, and be treated like a criminal. And I don't blame them for that. They make this country better by sharing their skills, by sharing their knowledge, by working, by paying taxes, by having an exchange of ideas and in cultures. This is really what makes the United States places us at the cutting edge of the world's economy. But if we lose that because we're no longer seen as a safe haven for expression and justice, I think it's so important that we talk about this, because we have seen a record number of American citizens be detained. This is unheard of. So is this really about immigration law, or is this really about fulfilling campaign promises so that you continue to have a stage going forward? I've always thought it was the latter, and it's quite sad that the public has been left in scratching their heads, not really knowing what's going on, because on one side, you're being presented, they're taking your jobs, they're taking your money, but in reality, there's just no numerical data and legal data to even support that.
So we talked about the fact that Governor DeSantis is intensifying calls to curb H-1B visas and restrict hiring of foreign temporary workers at public universities. Is he overstepping his bounds? And I ask that because isn't that policy federally governed?
In my opinion, he is. But we've seen DeSantis do this a few times when it comes to immigration law. So I believe about 1.5 years, 2 years ago, he passed a law that if you were carrying somebody in your car that, you know, did not have status, now you're committing human trafficking. And it was that big show, and construction workers, it was right after a hurricane. Construction workers left the state in hordes. We had the west coast of Florida really suffer with the lack of labor available to rebuild the houses. It was really chaotic. And in the end, the state of Florida only made one detention that is currently being appealed. So these laws that overstep bounds have become the norm in American politics, sadly, on both sides of the aisle, just to prove a point. I think that the American voter ought to ask themselves, are we really doing politics for the benefit of the people, or are we always doing politics for the benefit of re-election or election? Because it seems to me that, well, I shouldn't say it seems, I find it to be unacceptable that elected officials have such little knowledge, working knowledge, basic knowledge of immigration law, which really is an intrinsic part of the United States economy. I mean, we are the country that receives, and Florida, if I'm not mistaken, is the third largest recipient of investment dollars from foreigners, both in the form of real estate and venture capital. Do we really want to lose that? We have seen lower demand for Disney parks, and you think, okay, well, how is that related to immigration? Directly related to immigration. Number of visas issued has gone down. Parents are apprehensive about being treated like cattle through Florida airports by immigration. And then this all trickles down to the average Joe who works across the street from Disney World. And now their shifts are being cut. They're not making as many tips. Hotels don't have as much occupancy. This really impacts all of us, particularly in the state of Florida, if we keep having irrational and even dare I say illegal laws that portray the state as an unfriendly place for even those that have legal status in the country.
So when you try to look at the reality for Governor DeSantis in the state of Florida, if states can't simply rewrite federal visa rules, and cutting off H-1B workers would do real damage to hospitals, universities, and local jobs, wouldn't that just create expensive court fights?
Unquestionably. I think that law firms that are providing off-counsel services to state and cities and counties that are embroiled in this are really salivating because the amount of litigation dollars that will be destined for this is just going to be a historic high. Because if we look at the individuals within the legal departments of our state, of any state really, it is rare that you will have attorneys with sufficient legal knowledge in immigration law to even have these debates in court. So you have to hire outside. And I, as a taxpayer, really question the purpose of using these dollars for this purpose, because if you think about it, during the Biden administration, there was a lot of litigation against the federal government, dollars spent left and right by states fighting the federal government. And then once you have a change in president and a change in party, all those litigation dollars go down the drain. They come to an agreement, the law is withdrawn. And I think that in this mix, no matter what your party is, I want to make sure that the viewers understand this is not a partisanship position. I always ask, do the voters really know what they're supporting? Is it presented to them in a transparent way so that they can make an informed decision about whether or not that's a priority for them? And if voters knew that, for example, when we talk about H-1Bs and the taking of jobs, the Department of Labor is the one that sets the salaries for those individuals. So they cannot work for less money. They cannot cut in front of an American worker. They have to be very specialized and fulfill a set of criteria that's very hard to meet. So when you learn of these facts, does it change your mind about whether or not they're stealing jobs? For me, it does, because if the government, through the Department of Labor, Federal Department of Labor, is the one setting these wages, and they're saying that Americans should be working for those wages as well, do we have a wage problem or do we have an immigration problem? I think that those are all questions that we haven't received answers to.
Do many of these viewers remember that their grandparents, great-parents, and great-great-grandparents fought these same battles? You know, is that history lost to them? You know, that's a question that has to be asked as well. And while we're talking about history, let me ask you, through the vision and the prism of the Constitution and history, there's a constitutional scholar who observed the nation's history is complicated, but restricting legal avenues for newcomers speaks to a tension between protectionism and the promise of a land of opportunity. Thoughts about that?
I've always said that Americans don't have a problem with immigration as long as there's no perception that it impacts their money, their pockets. This is historic and this has happened everywhere. I think that we're being presented what we're being presented as an immigration issue is really an economic issue that no party has the answer to. You mentioned grandfathers and great-grandfathers. I look at, I've been in the United States for 23, 24 years, and a mere 10 to 15 years ago, any kid leaving college would get a job paying $50,000, $55,000 a year, and they would be able to rent an apartment, to have an average car, and not have to go on food stamps. Now, if you have somebody who's coming out of school, they're lucky if they can get a job. These jobs are not being stolen by immigrants. Quite to the contrary, immigrants create job creating companies in the United States at record rates because they come here and, contrary to popular belief, they don't have access to any health care. I mean, Americans barely have any access to health care, let alone somebody without a social security and a lot of times without a driver's license who manages to pay taxes on their earnings, because that's the overwhelming majority. And they go out there and they create successful companies, they create jobs, they hire people, but they are not given an opportunity to go into the legal flow of society. So they live in the shadows and yet they succeed. Aren't those the kind of people we want helping rebuild this country as a country where no matter where you start, no matter where you come from, if you work hard, if you apply yourself, you have an opportunity to make something of you and of your peers, because when someone rises, everyone around that individual rises. So I think that Americans really have a reason to be distraught and upset because we're living through a period of historic inflation. I don't quite agree with the unemployment numbers. I think that a lot of people are not being accounted for because they're getting tired of looking for jobs. I see attorneys struggling to make ends meet with a crushing burden of student loans. And yet we have people that want to come here and make something out of themselves and work and create jobs. Why not create a legal pathway that's accessible for these individuals? We would be a better country if we had that, as opposed to blaming these individuals on something that's really not their fault. America is losing its edge. And when we look at America first, it involves bringing to our side everybody who wants to fight for a better United States, be it culturally, economically. You know, when we talk about fighting for the United States, in 2016, we had the MAVNI program, which is a program that allowed individuals in the country with some sort of status to go into the armed forces and earn their green card. And that program was eliminated. Why? I can't think of anybody who deserves to be in the United States more than somebody who is willing to die to protect this country. So the narratives are convoluted, and it's just pitching us against each other, when in reality, we are all fighting for the same thing. We want better jobs for us, for our kids. We want affordable housing. We want healthcare. We want safety and security. And we want an America that we can all be proud of.
You know, you brought up an interesting point. You brought up the word economy. Is it about immigration or is it about the economy? There is so much that goes back to the economy. And I hearken back to James Carville and what he said when, you know, the issue was that, George Bush, Daddy George, wasn't going to be reelected. It's about the economy, stupid. Presidential outcomes, it's about the economy. Immigration, it's about the economy. The next presidential election will be about the economic state of America. What's this government shutdown about? It's about the economy. James Carville was right then. James Carville is right now. Before we go to break, I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the situation in Chicago. A federal judge issued a preliminary injunction restricting the use of force by federal agents, finding the Trump administration's version of recent events involving agents was not credible. That top Border Patrol official basically lied about the turn of events. What's your take on that?
It's quite sad that the integrity of the American legal system is being made a mockery of just in favor of deporting bad immigrants. When you have an individual who is a part of the America's law enforcement squad that doesn't understand that their job is to uphold the law in its integrity and with impartiality, that puts all of us at risk. And I think, for me, there are great men and women of integrity working at ICE. And at the end of the day, they have a job to do, and they do things that are important for the United States. They protect our borders. However, I can't imagine that those individuals go home proud of themselves because they arrested a 7-year-old while she was dragging her pink backpack with unicorns, and that makes them feel good. Not because the law shouldn't be applied to all, but is that really how we want to apply the use of our forces in the country. I don't think that it is. I think that the force is just being permeated by individuals who just want to taste blood no matter what the cost. And that will start seeping throughout the American legal system. And then all of us, not just immigrants, will be subjected to injustices. And that's really what America has never been about. We've always been about impartiality of the law. And unfortunately, that's not what's happening right now.
And the reports of inhumane conditions at immigration facilities, which have been found just credible.
Immigration detention is a very profitable business. If you look at the stock performance of both the Geo Group and Civitas and a few others that have banded together, some venture capital funds that used to finance war contractors, but found that it is a lot more profitable to fund a war at home that doesn't really kill any soldiers, that doesn't require heavy weaponry, and that's a fight against immigrants. So we have to ask, who is this really benefiting? I guarantee you, John or Paul or Mary, anywhere in the state of Florida in the United States, immigrants being detained, it's not that they should be here from a legal standpoint, but immigrants being detained is not helping you unless you own stock in these companies or you are one of their executives. Because at the end of the day, we are seeing an increasing cost of labor. America has a birth rate issue as well, and that will be accentuated with the departure of immigrants, because if they have American kids, if these individuals become U.S. citizens, that alleviates the economic pressures that a low birth rate will have in the mid and long-term economic effect. So we have to have a discussion that goes beyond, let's just throw these people in a car, in a van, treat them inhumanely, and that makes us great. That's not what makes America great, and that's not what will keep America great in years to come.
When Politics and Power continues, more on the immigration debate with USA for All founder Renata Castro. Does the debate now touch on deeper questions about national identity and opportunity? Welcome back to Politics and Power. Bruce Hamilton with immigration attorney and the founder of USA for All, Renata Castro. Renata, the basic question in political circles here is, when you look at targeted enforcement and wage protections, are they really practical alternatives to blanket bans?
I hope that we would expand this discussion to why are employers hiring these individuals? Because I think that there's always a perception of foreign trained employees are cheaper wage-wise, and that's rarely the truth. I think we have to ask, why is it that Americans don't want to fill those positions, number one? And number two, what can we do collectively to not rely on foreign trained on a foreign trained workforce for the mid and long term? But until we have a solution to that, just applying these bans, wage curtailing, or directives with fines, such as the $100,000 fine that the federal government wants to impose on companies petitioning for H-1Bs, it just seems erratic and unsustainable. It really unpredictable. It creates a landscape even within the Department of State, because they apply certain rules through their consulates and embassies, and the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services under the Department of Homeland Security. You wake up and every single day there is a novel directive that wasn't present the night before, and there's an expectation that it has to be implemented then and there. It creates such chaos for these government employees that are so stressed out because they really don't know what they're doing now more than ever. Now, once again, is this creating normalcy and an even level playing field for American workers, or is it actually creating chaos for American workers that are being impacted by these erratic decisions that end up being challenged in court, brought down, and then once again we go into this legal merry-go-round of erratic law, challenge that, and just dollars being wasted day in and day out?
We talked about misperception earlier. Is there a general misunderstanding about this issue because of the way it's all painted? Do people realize that these H-1B workers aren't just outsiders taking jobs? Many feel specialized roles. Think lab technicians on federal grants, nurses in hospitals, engineers building products, and that losing them can stop projects cold and cost local jobs, cost American jobs.
Well, yes, there's a major misconception that these individuals just, I don't know, walk through the border and visas handed to them. It's a lengthy, expensive process. These are high qualified individuals who not only have to have a bachelor's degree or higher, they need to be filling a position which requires a bachelor's degree. Now, another thing that I noticed that hasn't been brought to light is the fact that a lot of these individuals who work for universities and who are professors, they have such extensively successful professional careers that they may be eligible for a green card on their own right based on the extraordinary ability, the Einstein visa. So some of them are here on an H-1B because they don't want to be here permanently. They're fulfilling contracts and research projects, and then they will move on to their next project. So they would have an opportunity to get a green card if they so wanted to, based on their professional excellence. Now, do we want to close a door for them as they work here in research, providing invaluable work in healthcare, in technology, in all areas, in education, just because it sounds like something that's helping open up positions for U.S. trained individuals, when in reality, recruitment is done. And by recruitment, I mean job ads have to be placed in certain circumstances. And I have spoken to several employers. We represent several employers in the state of Florida and throughout the United States. And they say sometimes my job ads go unanswered for weeks at end, or people will not show up for interviews. So what do we do? Do we bring the economy to a halt because we don't want to issue visas to these individuals who want to work and fulfill positions, creating economic output for U.S.-based employers? So I don't believe in these bans. I think there has to be a better way of controlling or of leveling the influx and outflux of individuals coming to work in the United States. And it's not only because I'm an immigration attorney, I'm a business owner, and time in, time out, I've always seen that having a qualified foreign trained economic workforce has helped the United States, will continue to help the United States. And if we don't act fast, other countries have already taken the lead in attracting these brains. Canada, China, Singapore, and we will lose access to, in some cases, even life-changing technology that could be developed here in the United States and bring all its benefits to our people as opposed to other countries.
So given what you just said, if there is abuse, aren't there smarter fixes, things like, stronger enforcement, higher required wages, audits?
And those happen frequently. I think that the government hasn't really explained what abuse is, because when I look at abusing H-1B quotas, there is a consulting company called Tata that historically has used the overwhelming majority of quotas from H-1Bs. But if you're a company that has 50,000 employees and 5,000 are here on an H-1B, proportionally, is that really a high number? I personally don't think so. I think that we have to ask these employers that are making the investment on legal fees, on time, because when you bring an employer and you put them on the H-1B lottery, it really is a lottery. You don't know if that's going to work out or not. You have to make payments. You have to wait. There's the uncertainty of consular interviews. I think the government should bring these employers to the table and say, why is it so hard for you to recruit stateside? What are your pain points? What are your challenges? What are the things we're not teaching our kids in school, in grade school, in college? Why is it that states are struggling to attract kids to college so that they can fulfill these positions? I think that these are the conversations that would allow us to transition into a lesser reliance on these foreign trade employees, but there has to be a long-term plan. Just quitting cold turkey is not helpful to the economy at all.
Let me go back to something that you touched on when we started the program, the rhetoric from the politicians. Can they really show clear examples where a qualified local worker lost a job to an H-1B doing the exact same job and pay?
I have yet to see that happen. And I think that I speak for myself and my immigration attorney colleagues that there's a lot more perception than reality. Listen, this is a time where attention spans are very short and clickbait on social media really populates and dominates the imagination of everyone of every age bracket. So if you read a headline, that's taken as full evidence. We have trials of 15 seconds on social media, and that's not how you make successful, well thought out, long-term decisions that position a state or a country for success. And I hate to bring economic success, but economic success lifts all other areas. It generates money to finance health efforts, education efforts. It really sets the stage for success overall. So when we look at these allegations that these individuals are stealing jobs, stealing from who can really say that they lost a position, that they were not recruited for a position because a foreign worker took their position, and they were both equally trained, equally experienced, and even dare I say, equally willing to fill those jobs under the circumstances that industry requires. I have never seen it. I would be curious to see if the government can provide that kind of evidence. But in my opinion, in legal experience, it's purely anecdotal, and it just helps push a narrative that's very far from the truth.
Okay, so looking for solutions. Target the cheaters, whomever they may be, not the researchers. Fix enforcement and wage rules, not gut the labs, the hospitals and universities that create the local jobs.
I would go a step further and really create an expedited, more transparent way to bring these individuals to the United States.
Fix the system.
With accountability. Fix the system. The last time we've had immigration reform was in 1996. We still sent faxes. We're living at a time of augmented reality and trying to fit our needs based on a time where we had to use a fax machine to communicate. So there's a discrepancy, and there's an unwillingness to create legislative reform to serve the America of today. The America of today has an aging population that needs these foreign trained nurses. Even if all nursing schools in the United States graduated at their maximum capacity, we would still be 15 years away in output to meeting the demand for trained nurses throughout the United States. And those numbers can be even worse in rural America. So do we really want to kick out these people who want to work here legally? I don't think so. Immigration reform, better and more transparent enforcement. When we look at enforcement, I have seen a lot of employees be detained. I haven't seen large American employers be fined and detained. Quite to the contrary, I have seen hits on immigrant-owned businesses that I haven't seen happen to quote-unquote American businesses, mainly because of perception. American employers are struggling because they need people who are willing to work. We need to bring them to the table, ask them questions, and design an immigration system that works for all of us.
So if I'm hearing you, the bottom line here is, if you care about good jobs, strong universities, reliable hospitals, ask for targeted fixes, stronger enforcement, higher wage floors, and faster green cards rather than headline-grabbing bans that will do more harm than good.
I could not agree more with your summary of what I believe as a practicing attorney and as a business owner would really be the solution mid and long term to the United States and this whole immigration debate.
Renata Castro, thank you for your time. For those of you who are watching, we always invite your comment, insightful, and make sure that what you have to say to us is grounded and kind, and we certainly will respond. Thank you for watching Politics and Power.
See why every day more people are choosing News 4 Jax, Northeast Florida and South Georgia's #1 source for local news.